Reading the last chapter in Seth-Dreams and Projections of Consciousness by Jane Roberts. Chapter 22, The Inside of Consciousness. So first of all, Jane notes the images and forms Seth speaks about in that session would not disappear when you banished your own hallucinations, as mentioned earlier. In the next session, Seth explained more about root assumptions and for the first time mentioned psychedelic experience in connection with projection. Alright, session 285, Seth says, root assumptions represent the basic premises upon which a given existence system is formed. These are the ground rules, so to speak. Your physical mechanisms are equipped to function in such a way that reality is perceived through the lens of particular root assumptions then. Using the physical senses, it is almost impossible for you to perceive reality in any other way. Physically speaking, you will find nothing to contradict these assumptions, since they are all that you can experience or perceive physically. These root assumptions are the framework of the camouflage system. As you explore other realities, you almost automatically interpret such data in terms of the root assumptions of your own system. This highly falsifies such information. The inner senses are not bound by those assumptions, however. This is why so many psychic or subjective experiences seem to contradict physical laws. You must learn the laws that apply to other systems. The root assumptions that govern physical reality are indeed valid, but within physical reality alone. They do not apply elsewhere. There is a natural tendency to continue judging experience against these assumptions, however. With experience, the habit will lose much of its hold. Inner experience must be colored to some extent by the physical system, while you exist in it. In order for such data to rise to conscious levels, for example, it must be translated into terms that the ego can understand, and the translation is bound to distort the original experience. The whole physical organism of the body has been trained to react to certain patterns, these based on physical root assumptions. The nervous system reacts definitely to visual block images. Such images are received through the skin, as well as through the eyes. The whole system is highly complicated and organized. This is obviously necessary for physical survival. The organization, however, is, biologically speaking, artificial and learned. It is no less rigid for that reason. This organizational structure of perception can be broken up, as recent LSD experiments certainly show. This can be dangerous, however. The fact that this does occur shows that the systems of perception are not a part of overall structure biologically, but learned secondary responses. It is disturbing to the whole system, however, to break up the strong pattern of usual perception. Inner stability of response is suddenly swept away. Changes that are not yet known occur within the nervous system under these circumstances, both electromagnetic and chemical. The inner senses alone are equipped to process and perceive other reality systems. Even the distortions can be kept at a minimum with training. Indiscriminate use of psychedelic drugs can severely shake up learned patterns of response that are necessary for effective manipulation within physical reality. Break subtle connections and you disturb electromagnetic functions. Ego failure can result. Development of the inner senses is a much more effective method of perceiving other realities, and followed correctly, the ego is not only stronger, but more flexible. even consciousness of physical reality is increased. Such development becomes an unfolding and natural expansion of the whole personality. These root assumptions are so a part of your existence that they cloud your dreams. Beneath them, however, portions of the self perceive physical reality in an entirely different fashion, free of the tyranny of objects and physical form. Here you experience concepts directly, without the need for symbols. You have knowledge of your past personalities and know that they exist simultaneously with your own. The practice of psychological time will allow you to reach these portions of the self. The ego is not artificially disorganized by such practice. It is simply bypassed for the moment. The experience gained does become a part of the physical structure, but there is no massive disorganization of perception, since the ego agrees to step aside momentarily. It is not bombarded as with the drug experiments and forced to experience chaotic and frightening perceptions that can terrify it into complete disorder. Survival in your system is dependent upon the highly specialized, focused, limited, but specific qualities of the ego. It should not be rigid. Neither should it be purposely weakened. The root assumptions upon which physical reality is formed represent secure ground to the ego. We always operate with the ego's consent. It interprets the inner knowledge gained in its own way, true, but it is immeasurably enriched by doing so. The ego can exist only within the context of these assumptions. The primary dream experience is finally woven into a structure composed of these assumptions, and it is these you remember. These serve you as basic information, but the information is in symbolic form. Objects, you see, are symbols. Dream objects are often symbols of realities that the ego could not otherwise perceive. Alright, Jane notes right here, some out-of-body experiences are extremely difficult to categorize and involve extraordinarily sensuous events that remain vivid long after their occurrence. Some are suggestive of drug-induced episodes, except for the greater sense of alertness and self-control. Okay, so Jane says here, Seth has more to say about hallucinations and objects in session 287 for September 21st, 1966, and perhaps the first part of the following excerpt helps explain my experience. I didn't read her experience, but you could buy the book. So anyways, Seth was talking about basic reality in the dream state. Here's Seth. You will sometimes automatically translate this reality into physical terms. Such images will be hallucinatory, but it may take a while for you to distinguish their true nature. It must be understood, however, that all physical objects are hallucinatory. They may be called mass hallucinations. There is constant translation of inner reality into objects in the waking state, and a constant translation of ideas into pseudo-objects in the dream state. Within a certain range of dream reality, ideas and thoughts can be translated into pseudo-objects and transported. This is what happens when you adopt a pseudo-form in projection, though I am simplifying this considerably. When you travel beyond a certain range of intensities, even pseudo-objects must vanish. They exist in a cluster about and connected to your own system. The lack of these obviously means that you have gone beyond your own camouflage system. If it were possible, you would then travel through a range of intensities in which no camouflage existed. Then you would encounter the pseudo-camouflage of the next system. This would or would not be physical matter, according to the system. You would then encounter the heart of the camouflage area. The completely uncamouflaged areas at the outer edges of the various systems should remind you of the undifferentiated areas between various life cycles in the subconsciousness. This is no coincidence. As a rule, you see, there is little communication within the uncamouflaged areas. They act as boundaries, even while they represent the basic stuff of which all camouflage is composed. Without the camouflage, you would perceive nothing with the physical senses. The sentence is really meaningless, however, because the physical senses are themselves camouflage. There would be nothing to translate. It is only the inner senses that will allow you to perceive under these circumstances. Theoretically, if you can bridge the gap between various reincarnations, then you can bridge the gap between your system and another. Once more, the undifferentiated layers are composed of the vitality that forms the camouflage of all systems. Such an area is not really a thing in itself, but a portion of vitality that contains no camouflage and is therefore unrecognizable to those within any given system. You are in touch with infinity in such areas, since it is only camouflage that gives you the conception of time. Now, during some projections, you may be aware of nothing as far as surroundings are concerned. There will only be the mobility of your own consciousness. If this occurs, you will be traveling through such an uncamouflaged area. You could then expect to encounter next a more differentiated environment that seems to become clearer as you progress toward the heart of another system. The completely uncamouflaged layer would be rather bewildering. You might automatically be tempted to project images into it. They would not take, so to speak, but would appear and disappear with great rapidity. This is a silent area. Thoughts would not be perceived here as a rule, for the symbols for them would not be understood. If a certain intensity is reached, however, a peak of intensity, then you could perceive the spacious present as it exists within your native system. You could, from this peak, look into other systems, but you would not understand what you perceived, not having the proper root assumptions. I've used the idea of neighboring systems for simplicity's sake, as if they were laid out end to end. Obviously, such is not the case. The systems of reality are more like the various segments of a tangerine, with the uncamouflaged boundary areas like the white membrane between the tangerine sections. The tangerine, then, would be compared to a group of many systems, yet it would represent in itself but one portion of an unperceived whole. The tangerine would be but one segment of a larger system. You can see then why some projections would lead you in a far different direction from your linear sort of travel, and why time, as you know it, would be meaningless. Nor do such projections necessarily involve journeys through space as you know it. There are systems, vivid in intensity, that have no existence in physical reality at all. It is now thought, I believe, that time and space are basically one, but they are both a part of something else. They are merely the camouflage patterns by which you perceive reality. Space, as you perceive it in the dream state, comes much closer to the reality. Projections within your own system will, of course, involve you with some kind of camouflage. If none is present, you will know you are out of the system. The dream universe is obviously closely connected with your own, since pseudo-objects are present. Even there, you are to some extent free from the space-time elements of your own system. Within the dream state, then, you are in the outward areas of the physically oriented universe. 1 point. There are other systems all about and within your own. The undifferentiated areas move out like spirals through all reality. Little resistance is encountered within them. They represent inner roads that connect systems, as well as divide them. The traveler must leave his camouflage paraphernalia behind him, or he will get nowhere. It is possible, theoretically, to travel to any system in this manner and bypass others, you see. Such a traveler would not age physically. His body would be in a suspended state. Only very few individuals have traveled in this manner. Most of the knowledge gained escapes the ego, and the experiences cannot be translated by the physical brain. However, it is possible to travel under such circumstances, and some of the data would be retained by inner portions of the self. In a creative individual, some of the information might be symbolically expressed in a painting or other work of art. Each brush stroke of a painting represents concentrated experience and compressed perception. In a good painting, these almost explode when perceived by the lively consciousness of another. The observer is washed over by intensities. The excellent work of art recreates for the observer inner experience of his own also, of which he has never been aware. As you know, paintings have motion, yet the painting itself does not move. This idea should help you understand experience in terms of intensities and projections, or the movement of consciousness without necessarily motion through space. True motion has nothing to do with space. The only real motion is that of the traveling consciousness. So that's the last excerpt, and I'm going to end with Jane's last notes here of her experience. She says, "My own recent projection was so very close to home compared to the possible journeys Seth mentioned in the previous excerpts. Again, it reminded me later of reported sense experience under the influence of drugs. It was most unusual, and I'm sure I'll never forget it." Here's her notes. "Last Thursday, May 6, 1971, I took an hour nap in the late morning. No suggestions were given. It was another dark day, and the air was full of moisture. I came to in Rob's studio. I was standing before the open window, looking out at the pear tree, but it was the air itself that captured my attention. It was transparent as always, but thick as jello. Astonished, I thrust my hand out the window, and the motion sent ripples out, making fairly deep cracks near my fingers and more shallow ones farther away. The tree, I saw, was not only held up and supported by its roots deep in the earth, but by the air itself. Why had I ever thought that branches stayed up simply because this was how branches acted? The air itself helped hold them. I was fully alert and more curious than I can say. Several times I put my hand out as far as I could go and wiggled my fingers. The air stirred like pudding. There was much greater contrast than usual between the very dark clouds high above and the rest of the air, and colors, dark purple, a grayish white, and several green and dark grays, almost appeared like clumps, thick and then thinning. What would happen to objects falling, I wondered. From everything I saw, I judged that they would glide to earth or drop slowly through the textured air. The effect was far from inert, though. The sky and air moved constantly, perhaps like very heavy jellied water, with the trees stuck in like huge seaweed. I felt as if I could almost walk on the air, but from the motion of my hand through it, I knew it was not normally heavy enough to support me. Cautiousness and wonder made me pause. For one thing, the air inside the room was normal. For another, I felt as if I was observing a legitimate glimpse of air from the framework of a different kind of perception. Was this in some way air slowed down? And if so, was my body in the same state? Was this what air was really like? And was it perceived this way by certain kinds of consciousness or at particular stages of molecular activity? All of these thoughts went through my mind, but before I could figure out what other experiments I could try, I snapped back to my body. Alright, Jane notes after she says, "The experience was so intriguing that I thought of it often in the days following. That Sunday, as we were out driving, the idea suddenly struck me that there might be a force coming up from the earth in opposition to gravity. The two could be part of one phenomena, of course. It could account for the fact that seeds do push up through the earth, not only attracted by the sun, but nudged by this force beneath. That experience is far more vivid than anything else that happened to me that day or during that entire month so far. It will be remembered long after I forget what else I did that day. It does no good to call such episodes hallucinations. They are, above all, valid psychological events. They enrich normal experience, broaden the usual restrictions of daily perception, and encourage creative thought. The same applies to all of the dreams and projections mentioned in this book. These dimensions of experience and consciousness coexist with normal reality as we know it, and I believe that in them we exercise abilities that are ours by right and heritage." So that's the end of this book. I hope you all enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll go buy the book and read all the goodies that are inside that you didn't hear. Thank you for watching.